He said it was the price for the rice. On Fridays, the food arrived. On Sundays, my body was taken behind the church, and my mother told me to smile because God loved cheerful children. My name is Sarah Louise Myers. I'm 66 years old, and I live in a quiet street in Toledo, Ohio. I sew wedding dresses for women I'll never meet. My apartment smells like old wood and boiled coffee. There's a radio on the kitchen counter that hasn't changed stations in years. It plays the same familiar gospel hymns, but I don't listen to the words anymore. Not since I understood what they really meant. The truth is, I've spent most of my life pretending none of it happened. Pretending I wasn't that little girl, the one who sat silent while her body was bartered like a loaf of bread. Sometimes I still forget that I'm safe. I lock the front door 3 times every night, and I flinch when someone knocks too hard. My bones remember things my mind tries to forget. The coldness of a pew under my bare legs, the stickiness of sweat in places no child should feel it, the sound of a zipper in a sacred place. These memories live in my spine, not just my mind. They settle in my hands when I'm sewing lace, in the way I avoid mirrors, in how I hold my breath when someone touches my shoulder. People see an old woman now, someone ordinary, invisible. But if they look closely, they'd notice I never sit near windows, that I keep the curtains drawn, that I jump when I hear church bells. I've built a quiet life piece by piece, like one of my dresses. But underneath every seam is a scar. When I was 7, my world was the size of a kitchen. The linoleum was cracked and the fridge hummed like a warning. My mother smoked menthols and read the Bible in whispers. She said blessings came to those who obeyed, that food was a reward for sacrifice. I didn't understand what sacrifice meant, not until the first time she told me to wash my face, comb my hair, and put on the blue dress with the flowers. It was Sunday. I remember because my stomach growled loud enough to echo. She told me a guest was coming, a man of God, and that I needed to be respectful, that my smile was part of our offering. I didn't know what kind of offering she meant. I thought maybe he was bringing groceries. I didn't expect him to touch my hand and call me special. I didn't expect my mother to close the kitchen door behind him and leave me alone. He smelled like tobacco and cologne. His hands were heavy. When he spoke, he quoted scripture. He said I was chosen, that purity was something I could give. When it started to hurt, I cried, and he said, "Shh, child. The Lord sees everything. You don't want to make him angry." That was the first time I realized God might hate me. Afterwards, I bled on the kitchen towel. My mother came in and wiped it up like spilled milk. She didn't look at me, just said, "Next time don't scream. We're lucky he's generous." That's how it began. With a smile I didn't mean and a dress I never wore again. With a man who prayed before and after. With a mother who told me pain was holy. That hunger was worse. And maybe she was right, because I kept doing it, week after week. Sometimes different men, sometimes the same one, all with crosses on their necks and Jesus in their mouths. I learned to fold my feelings into silence, to count the grooves on the wood paneling while they moved, to bite my tongue until it bled. My mother would hum gospel songs in the next room. She said faith was tested through the body, that mine was saving us both. I started to think maybe I was the problem, that if I had been holier, smarter, quieter, they wouldn't need me. I tried to pray it away. I begged Jesus to make me invisible. I promised to be good, to be perfect. But the more perfect I became, the more they wanted me. And my mother beamed with pride every time the doorbell rang. Even now, after decades, I can still hear the creak of that front door. I can still feel the weight of his breath on my skin. And I can still see my mother counting the cans in the cupboard, her hands shaking as she placed the rice on the shelf. She never said thank you to them, only to me. She'd say, "See what you brought us? You're a blessing, Sarah." For a long time, I believed her. I thought maybe that was what blessings looked like. Dirty, hidden, painful. I thought maybe love meant obedience, that family meant sacrifice. I thought every little girl had Sundays like mine, that behind every church there was a door that didn't lock, a girl who didn't scream, a mother who called it salvation. I only started questioning things when I noticed other children in church wearing clean clothes and eating snacks without trembling. Their mothers held their hands without squeezing. Their fathers didn't look at them like I was looked at. I realized then that I wasn't normal, that something was wrong. But the shame was so deep I couldn't speak, not even to myself. Silence became my safety, stillness my armor, and smiling was survival. If I smiled just right, they finished faster. If I didn't cry, my mother wouldn't slap me after. If I looked grateful, I'd get to eat that night. There's something evil about making a child believe that abuse is a gift, that pain is divine, that their body is a transaction. I didn't have words for it back then, but I felt it in my bones, that cold dread, that hollow ache, that sense that I didn't belong anywhere, not even in my own skin. I didn't know what to call what was happening to me. All I knew was that the people everyone trusted were the ones hurting me, that the place everyone called holy was the place I feared most, and that my own mother, the woman who gave me life, was the one handing me over, week after week, smile after smile. I spent years building a version of myself that didn't bleed, that didn't flinch, that didn't remember. But memory is a cruel thing. It waits, it festers, it shows up in dreams, in smells, in sounds you can't explain. It lives in the body long after the bruises fade. And so I sew, every stitch a prayer, every dress a burial. I live alone, not because I hate people, but because I never learned how to be close without being hurt. My voice trembles when I speak too long. My hands still shake when I button a collar. But I'm still here. I survived, somehow, even when I didn't want to, even when it would have been easier to disappear. I stayed. And now, for the first time, I speak. Because silence protected everyone except me. Because the truth deserves air. Because somewhere, another little girl is putting on her best dress, and she thinks it's her fault. It's not. It never was. I grew up in a house that smelled like mildew and canned soup. The wallpaper peeled off in the corners, revealing wood eaten by time and termites. Rain tapped on the roof as if reminding us we weren't safe, not even inside. My world was brown linoleum floors and the quiet creak of my mother's chair as she rocked back and forth, reading her Bible with trembling hands. Her voice was a whisper whenever she spoke to God, like she was afraid he'd actually listen. She told me we were chosen, that being poor wasn't a curse, but a test, that hunger was how God trimmed the fat from the soul. She said blessings came to those who kept their mouths shut and their faith firm. She said everything we had was a gift, even the silence, especially the silence. We didn't have much. A single burner stove, one cracked pot for boiling water, and a refrigerator that growled like it was angry to still be running. I used to watch the condensation drip down the side of the fridge and wonder if the machine was crying too. Our church was just 3 blocks away. First Pilgrim Holiness Tabernacle. The name alone was a mouthful, and the building was as heavy as it sounded. Gray stone, small stained glass windows, and a tall wooden door with a brass handle that burned in the summer and froze in the winter. Every Sunday, the door opened for us, but what happened after service was never written in any sermon. The first time I saw the man my mother called Pastor William, he was handing out bread from the back of a pickup truck. The loaves were stale, and the peanut butter had oil on top that no one stirred. But to me it looked like gold. He told my mother she had a good girl, that I had light in my eyes. I didn't know what he meant, but the way he said it made my stomach twist. He was the first to come to our house with groceries and promises. A box of pancake mix, 2 cans of corn, in the same words every time. The Lord sees your sacrifice. He blesses obedience. My mother said nothing, just nodded and closed the door behind him. Then she told me to change into the blue dress with the flowers and sit quietly until he came back. Afterwards, she wiped my thighs with a damp cloth and said, "Now we eat," as if that explained everything, as if bruises were the cost of breakfast. Soon the food became a schedule. Fridays were delivery days, Sundays were offerings. The pattern was never broken. We never went without rice. But I stopped asking questions. I stopped playing outside. I stopped speaking unless I was spoken to. I learned that being invisible was safer than being seen. One afternoon, I sat on the front steps and watched a girl my age ride her bike up and down the sidewalk. Her hair bounced behind her, wild and free. Her mother called out to her from the porch, and the girl shouted back, laughing. The sound hit me like a slap. It was joy, and I realized I didn't recognize it. Our house was quiet unless there were men inside. Then the air felt thicker, the kind of quiet that holds its breath and hopes it isn't noticed. My mother never smiled in front of them, but after they left, she'd stand in the kitchen with her back to me and murmur, "Thank you, Lord, for the manna." Like abuse was a holy currency. Every room in our house had a memory. The hallway where I learned to brace myself, the couch where I bit into the cushion to stop from screaming, the bathroom mirror that reflected a girl I didn't recognize. I remember staring into that glass, trying to see what they saw in me, why they kept coming back, why my mother kept letting them. There were times I tried to tell her it hurt, that I was scared. She'd cut me off with a look and say, "Do you want to starve? Do you want to sleep on the street like that drunk woman by the gas station? We have what we need, Sarah, because of you. Don't ruin it." So I didn't. I nodded. I thanked God like she did. I folded my hands and kept my eyes low. I said yes, even when everything in my body screamed no. I learned to dissociate before I even knew that word existed. At school, I was quiet. My clothes always smelled like the cooking oil we reused too many times. My shoes had holes. My skin was pale and dry. The teachers never looked at me too long. One of them once asked if everything was okay at home. I told her, "Yes, ma'am." My mama prays every night. That seemed to satisfy her. I used to think if I could just be good enough, maybe it would stop. Maybe God would see me and decide I had passed the test. So I memorized every hymn. I kept my room clean. I learned to predict what they wanted. Some liked eye contact. Others didn't. Some were rough. Some were silent. Some cried afterward. I never knew what to do with that. My mother started referring to me as her blessing, her miracle, in front of them. She'd say, "This girl brings light into our home. Look at what she does for our family." I wasn't a person to her anymore. I was a meal ticket wrapped in a dress. Sometimes she'd dress me up for no reason, curl my hair, paint a little lipstick on my mouth. She said it made me look like a doll. I hated dolls. They couldn't scream either. One time I asked her if I could stop, if we had enough now. She slapped me hard enough to split my lip and said, "You don't get to question God's will. You're here for a purpose, Sarah. Don't you ever forget that." I didn't ask again. The winters were the worst. The cold seeped into the walls and into my bones. But the visits never stopped. The men came with their hands stuffed in their coat pockets and their breath clouding the air. My body became a furnace they used to warm themselves. And my mother lit candles after, as if to purify the space. There's something unnatural about a child knowing how to wash blood out of her underwear without staining the sink, about knowing how to hide pain with posture, how to smile on command. I became what they wanted me to be, a good girl, a quiet girl, a vessel. And my mother, she was the gatekeeper. I started sleeping with a spoon under my pillow. I don't know why. Maybe because it felt like a weapon. Maybe because I thought it could dig a hole out of this life. I never used it, but holding it made me feel like I had a choice, like I wasn't completely powerless. I prayed sometimes, not to be saved, but to be erased. I thought maybe if I just disappeared, the visits would stop, the food would stop, the silence would stop, but I didn't disappear. I just became someone else, someone who could take it, someone who stopped feeling. No one teaches you how to survive that kind of life. You just do. You shrink, you adapt, you become invisible in plain sight. And when the world doesn't see you, it doesn't have to help you. It can pretend you're fine. But I wasn't fine. I was starving in a house full of food. I was dying in a place that called itself holy. I was just a child, and I was never given a chance to be anything else. There came a point when I stopped keeping track of their names. At first I remembered each one distinctly, the way they smelled, the way they walked, the tone they used when they whispered prayers in my ear before unbuttoning their pants. But after a while, the visits blurred together. I no longer cared who they were. I only focused on how long they would stay and how deep the bruises would go. Some were kind, in the way a butcher might be gentle with a knife. They didn't yell. They didn't strike. They just used me like I was part of the building. A stool, a pillow, a sacred tool for their relief. Others were cruel in ways I didn't have words for. One liked to hold my nose so I couldn't breathe until the room spun. Another bit the back of my neck while mumbling scripture. Some smelled like peppermint. Others like sweat baked into wool. All of them wore the same mask, that of a holy man, a savior. My mother made it normal. She turned it into a ritual. On Saturdays, she'd set out a dress on my bed, clean socks, combed hair. She said, "Always look your best when you're in the presence of God's people." She said I was blessed to be so needed, that not every girl had purpose. I learned not to argue. Arguing only led to silence, and silence in our house meant punishment. Not the kind with belts or slaps, a different kind, a coldness, a way she would look through me like I wasn't there at all. There was a room in the back of the church that they called the prayer room. It had no windows. The carpet was dark red, stained in places that no one spoke about. A single lamp stood in the corner, always flickering. The door locked from the inside. That was where most of it happened. My mother would drop me off before service and say she had errands to run. The men would come in one by one. Sometimes they came in pairs. Sometimes they didn't even bother pretending anymore. I still remember the sound of the lamp's pull chain clicking as it swung, the way the bulb buzzed like a fly trapped in a jar. I learned to stare at the wall and count the tiny holes in the wood panels. 1, 2, 3, 4. Start again. 1, 2, 3, 4. It was the only way to keep from screaming. One of the regulars was a deacon named Elijah. He had a gold tooth that flashed when he smiled. He used to bring me candy, peppermint sticks and gumdrops. I hated peppermint, but I forced myself to eat them while he watched. He liked when I thanked him sweetly. He said it made me seem grateful, like a proper church girl. He was the first to start bringing others, strangers, men I had never seen at church. One said he was a visitor from out of town. Another wore a police badge under his coat. I didn't ask questions. I wasn't allowed to speak unless spoken to. I just obeyed. The rules were simple. Smile. Stay still. Don't cry. Crying made them mad. Crying made them stay longer. My mother once caught me vomiting in the sink after one of them left. She didn't say a word, just handed me a rag and walked out. I scrubbed until my fingers bled. The next morning, she made pancakes and said, "We don't bite the hand that feeds us. Be smart, Sarah." I nodded. I ate. I swallowed the nausea and the shame like it was communion. They started using the basement too. It was darker, more private. I remember the mold smell, the dampness that soaked into my socks. I remember one of the men pressing my face into a dusty mattress while reciting the 10 Commandments. He stopped on the one that said, "Thou shalt not lie." Then he made me promise not to tell anyone what he did. I kept my promises, because broken promises led to consequences. No food, no heat. My mother knew how to punish without lifting a hand. She'd stare out the window and say things like, "Maybe you aren't strong enough for this calling. Maybe I chose the wrong child." That cut deeper than any bruise. Some nights I'd wake up to find her sitting at the edge of my bed whispering prayers, her hands folded tight, her lips trembling. I wanted to believe she felt guilt, that maybe deep down she knew this was wrong. But then she'd stand, smooth my blanket and say, "God gives us what we need. You're what he gave me." I stopped asking why. There was no point. No one would have believed me. Not in that town, not in that church. The men who hurt me were the ones people trusted to bury their dead and bless their babies. They were the ones who held the keys to the community, who spoke with conviction and wore crosses around their necks like armor. No one would have looked at me and seen anything but a poor girl with a wild imagination. I got good at disappearing in plain sight, at blending into the wallpaper. I learned how to adjust my tone to fit whatever they needed me to be. Innocent? flirtatious, quiet, submissive. It was a performance I perfected before I even reached double digits. My body became a stage, my face a mask. There was a hymn we used to sing in church. It said, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." I used to repeat that line in my head while they touched me. I told myself I was meek, that one day I would inherit something, maybe peace, maybe death. I didn't know which I wanted more. They never asked my age. They didn't care. They only cared that I didn't resist, that I didn't make noise. My silence was the currency, and my mother was the banker. One man, a visiting preacher, brought a camera once, said he wanted to remember me. I was 9. He positioned me in front of the altar cloth and told me to smile. My mother stood behind him. She didn't flinch. When he left, she took the envelope he handed her and tucked it inside her Bible. That night we had meat for dinner. I chewed in silence, the taste turning to ash in my mouth. I don't know how many there were. Dozens, maybe more. Some came back, some didn't. Some called me Angel. Others used my name like it was a dirty word. I stopped listening to the words. They all blurred into one long noise that hummed in my ears long after they left. By the time I turned 10, my body felt older than my mother's. It ached in places I didn't have names for. I walked with a limp some days. My eyes sunk into my face. My laughter vanished, but no one asked. No one ever asked. Not the neighbors, not the teachers, not the church ladies who smiled so wide on Sundays. I was a ghost in my own skin, a shadow in a dress, and still they kept coming. And still my mother kept opening the door. By the time I was 10, the line between my mother and my abusers no longer existed. There was no more pretending that she didn't know. She wasn't just watching from a distance. She was arranging the meetings, fixing my clothes, telling me who would arrive and when. She began keeping track in a little notebook she kept inside her Bible. It had initials, dates, food quantities, and sometimes dollar signs. It was business to her, sacred business, and I was the merchandise. She no longer asked me if I was okay. That question vanished like my childhood. Instead, she'd say things like, "Clean yourself up," or "Make sure to smile," or "If you bleed again, use a towel." I would stand in the mirror and stare at myself without blinking, trying to find the girl who used to laugh at cartoons and sing in the yard. She was gone, replaced by someone mechanical, someone numb. I began to notice how her face would light up when she unpacked the groceries they left behind. She treated a jar of peanut butter like gold, held it to the light, thanked Jesus out loud. When we had enough, she'd bake cornbread or stew, and sometimes she'd hum while cooking. It was the only time she seemed happy. I realized she loved the food more than she loved me. The escalations became normal. They stopped knocking. They just walked in. My mother no longer left the house during the visits. She stayed in the other room, humming hymns or vacuuming while I was screaming into a pillow. Sometimes she stood right outside the door. Once, I caught her eye through the crack. She didn't look away. She didn't flinch. Her expression was blank, like she wasn't even there. One Sunday afternoon, there were 3 men. I had never seen 2 of them before. They were older, and one wore a sheriff's ring. They brought a box of canned goods and a carton of cigarettes. My mother opened the door wide, smiled, and said, "She's ready," like I wasn't even human, like I was something preheated and waiting. They took me downstairs into the basement. It was darker than usual because the light bulb had burned out the week before. I asked to keep the small lamp on, but they said no. They said darkness was part of the experience, that it helped me focus on the spirit. One of them brought duct tape. I tried to scream. He slapped me so hard my head bounced off the floor. My ears rang for days. After they left, I crawled upstairs barefoot. My knees were scraped raw, my face swollen. My mother sat at the kitchen table, folding paper towels into neat squares. She didn't look up. She just said, "Don't get blood on the floor." I mopped the trail behind me using an old towel. I threw it in the trash and went to bed without dinner. The next day, there was a new coat for her hanging on the doorknob, a deep blue winter coat with buttons that shimmered. She put it on and looked in the mirror, turning side to side. She smiled and said, "God always provides." I wanted to rip it off her shoulders and scream, but I didn't. I had learned that silence was safer. I stopped sleeping. My dreams were worse than the reality. In my sleep, I would relive the basement over and over. The pressure of hands, the burn of belts, the sound of boots on stairs. I started hiding knives under my mattress, not to use on them, on me. I thought if I could just end it, maybe she would finally cry. Maybe she would understand what she had done, but I couldn't do it. Even that freedom was too far from me. At school, I walked with a limp. My teacher asked if I had fallen. I said yes. She asked again later when I had a bruise on my temple. I said I bumped into a door. She nodded. No one dug deeper. No one reported anything. My attendance dropped. My grades plummeted. But as long as I kept showing up in a dress with clean shoes, the system looked the other way. There was a girl in my class named Rachel who once asked why I never came to birthday parties or play dates. I didn't know what to say. I had never been to one. I didn't even know how to play. She offered me a candy bracelet, and I held it like it might explode. I wanted so badly to ask her to take me home, to ask her if her mother brushed her hair or tucked her in at night, but instead, I said nothing. I let the moment pass, and that night, I chewed each piece of candy one by one, imagining what her house might smell like. The men grew bolder. They left marks in visible places, bruises that climbed up my neck, fingerprints on my arms. I tried to cover them with scarves and long sleeves, but the weather turned hot. I fainted once from the heat while walking home. A neighbor brought me water, asked if I was sick. I said it was just the sun. She didn't ask anything else. I started bleeding regularly, not from puberty, from damage, internal tearing. My mother gave me rags and said not to complain. If I stained the furniture, I'd have to sleep on the floor. Once I bled so badly I passed out in the tub. When I woke up, she was washing my hair. Not gently, not lovingly, just scrubbing hard, like she was cleaning a dirty dish. She said you need to look fresh for Sunday. That's all she said. The worst part wasn't the pain. It was the routine, the predictability, the knowledge that no matter how loud I screamed in my head, no one was coming to save me. Not the teachers, not the neighbors, not the church, especially not the church. There were moments I wished for illness, for something terminal, cancer, pneumonia, anything that would make them stop touching me. I thought maybe if I got sick enough, they would leave me alone. I even tried to catch colds on purpose. I stood outside barefoot in the snow. I drank dirty water from the faucet. I wanted fevers, but nothing came. My body refused to break. My mother once brought me to a church meeting and made me sit in the front row. I could feel the eyes of the men who had seen me naked, who had hurt me in ways I couldn't name. They nodded at me, sang hymns beside me. One placed a hand on my shoulder during the closing prayer. I froze. My mother said afterward, "You should feel honored. These are godly men. Do you understand how rare that is?" I started losing chunks of memory. Whole days vanished. I would look at the calendar and not know how we got there. I'd find myself in the kitchen with no idea why. I thought maybe I was dying inside. Maybe my soul was peeling away from my body, little by little. Maybe that was the only way I could escape without running. The abuse became mechanical, emotionless. My body stopped reacting. I felt nothing, not pain, not fear, just a numbness that settled into my bones. My mother noticed. She said, "You look dead behind the eyes." I told her I was fine. She said, "You better start acting grateful again or they won't come back." I wish I could say I did something brave, that I ran, that I fought, but I didn't. I continued to obey, to wash myself, to lay still, to smile when required, because deep down, I still believed I was the reason this was happening, that I had done something to deserve it, that I was bad, broken, rotten at the core. My mother made sure I believed that. She told me no one else would ever want me, that I was lucky she kept me, that without her, I'd be dead. I nodded every time she said it, because if I didn't, I might actually believe the opposite. And believing the opposite would hurt more than anything those men had done to me. When I started cutting myself, it wasn't about the pain. It was about control. Everything else in my life was orchestrated by someone else. When I breathed, when I ate, when I opened my legs. But the cuts were mine. Thin, precise, hidden beneath the waistband of my underwear or along the inside of my thighs where no one would look. I used a broken razor I found behind the washing machine. It was rusty and dull, but it gave me something no one else could: choice. I would lie awake at night, holding that blade like it was a secret friend. It didn't lie to me. It didn't demand anything. It gave and took in equal measure. And when the blood came, I felt something. Not joy, not peace, but at least it wasn't numbness. I carved small lines at first, just enough to make my skin sting, then deeper ones that throbbed when I walked. I didn't cry. I never cried. One morning I woke up with fever. My sheets were soaked and stuck to my legs. My vision blurred when I stood. I had wrapped the wound too tight the night before, and the infection had spread. My mother saw the stains and shouted from the doorway. She didn't ask how or why. She didn't ask anything. She told me to clean it before it ruined the mattress. When I couldn't stand, she grabbed my arm and yanked me up so hard, I thought it would pop out of place. Then she saw the cut. For the first time, she looked afraid. Not for me, for herself. She muttered something about not going to jail and wrapped my leg with an old dish towel. Then she made me get dressed and took me to the emergency room. I wore a hoodie even though it was warm outside. I couldn't stop shaking. The lights in the waiting room buzzed like insects, and the floor looked like it might crack open beneath me. I wanted to disappear. The nurse who called us in was named Donna. She was older, with a kind voice that didn't match the fluorescent coldness of the hospital. She smelled like lavender lotion and wore a pin on her chest that said, "Be the reason someone believes." I remember that because I stared at it the whole time, while she asked me questions, while she cleaned the wound, while she gently removed the makeshift bandage and saw the infection crawling up my thigh. Her hands paused. Her tone shifted. She asked softly if I had done this to myself. I didn't answer. I looked at my mother, who stood behind her with arms crossed and eyes like daggers. Donna turned and asked her to wait outside. My mother hesitated but left. When the door closed, I felt the air return to my lungs. Donna knelt beside the table and rested her hand on mine. She said she couldn't help me unless I told her the truth, that I didn't need to be afraid in there, that no one was going to hurt me. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to scream. Instead, I whispered, "My mother gives me to men for food, and I don't want it anymore." I watched her face change. Her smile dropped. Her eyes filled. She didn't speak for a long moment. Then she stood up quickly and left the room. I thought she was going to call my mother back in, that I had made a mistake, that I would be punished worse than ever before. I curled up on the table and waited. But it wasn't my mother who came back. It was a different nurse. Then another. Then two women in suits who said they were with Child Protective Services. They asked questions I didn't know how to answer. Dates, names, specifics. I told them what I could, how it started, where it happened, that my mother watched, that she sometimes chose who came. They took photos of the cuts, of the bruises. They asked if I would be willing to undergo a medical exam. I nodded, but I wanted to vanish. I was so tired, so hollow, so far from that little girl who used to sit on the porch and braid blades of grass. They moved fast, too fast for my mother. She was waiting in the hallway when they came out. She shouted, saying I was a liar, that I was disturbed, that I hurt myself for attention. One of the officers told her she needed to leave. She lunged toward me. Her face was red, her voice shrill, but she didn't reach me. They blocked her path and walked me to the back of the building through a different exit. The sun was setting as they led me to a white van with state plates. I watched the light flicker on the pavement like it didn't know whether to stay or leave. I sat in the back seat with a blanket around my shoulders. I didn't speak. I didn't ask where we were going. I didn't cry. They placed me in a temporary shelter with white walls and metal beds. The woman who ran it was named Miss Carla. She had short gray hair and wore sweaters even in summer. She gave me toothpaste and a notebook. She told me I didn't have to write anything unless I wanted to. I drew instead. Circles, lines, symbols I couldn't explain. At night I would lie in the bed and listen to the other girls breathing. Some snored, some whimpered. One screamed in her sleep every night at exactly 2 a.m. I felt less alone, not because I was loved, but because they understood the language of silence. We didn't have to explain. We had all been broken in different ways by the same hands. A week later, Donna came to visit me. She brought me socks and a soft blanket. She asked if I was okay. I told her I didn't know what okay meant. She sat with me for an hour just listening. Then, before she left, she said, "I believe you." That sentence stayed with me longer than anything anyone had ever said. There were court dates, so many court dates, lawyers, therapists, evaluations. Every adult wanted something from me. Details, reactions, clarifications. I learned to repeat myself without emotion, to sit still with my hands folded, to say I don't remember when the memories became too much. I watched grown men cry in court when I told my story. I didn't understand why they cried. Where were they before? My mother denied everything. She said I was mentally unstable, that I made up fantasies. She called herself a victim of my lies. But the evidence was enough. The medical records, the photos, the testimonies. I was not sent back to her. I moved through 3 different foster homes that year. Each one had its own rules, curfews, chores, expectations, but none of them asked me to undress. None of them asked me to pray on my knees. That alone made them feel like palaces. I kept my distance. I didn't attach. I didn't trust. I hoarded food under my bed for months, afraid the generosity would vanish. I flinched when someone walked behind me. I couldn't stand closed doors. I asked to keep a nightlight on even when I was 13, but I was safe. For the first time in my life, I was safe, and that safety felt like confusion, like stepping into sunlight after years in a cave. It hurt. It blinded. But I knew I couldn't go back. My body began to heal. The infections cleared, the bruises faded, but the scars remained. Some visible, some deeper, some hidden in the way I walk, in the way I breathe, in the way I still check the locks 3 times before bed. I had been rescued, pulled out of hell by a woman who believed me, who listened, who acted. And in that moment, in that van, with the sun sinking behind me, I realized I might one day become more than what they did to me. I might become someone new, someone whole, someone free. My mother was never arrested. She disappeared before the final court date, vanished like smoke from a candle, leaving no forwarding address, no goodbye, no apology, just silence. The kind of silence that screams louder than any word ever could. They told me she'd probably gone to live with a cousin in another state, that the authorities would continue looking, but they never found her. I stopped hoping they would. None of the men who hurt me served time. Some were quietly transferred to churches in different counties. Some simply denied everything and were believed. Others claimed I was a troubled child with an overactive imagination. There were whispers about the investigation, murmurs about evidence that mysteriously went missing. The sheriff with the gold ring. He retired with honors. The deacon with the candy. Promoted. And the camera, it vanished from evidence, just like my childhood. The truth is, the system doesn't always work the way it should, especially when the abusers wear robes and hold Bibles, when they preach love with one hand and take with the other, when a community protects its predators because admitting the truth would mean admitting they looked away, that they knew, that they chose comfort over justice. But I made it out. That sentence still feels strange in my mouth. I made it out. I was placed with a foster family that didn't demand anything from me. They let me sleep with the door cracked open, let me eat at my own pace, gave me space to breathe, to feel, to cry when I needed to. They didn't push me to talk, but when I finally did, they listened like every word mattered, like I mattered. School was difficult. I had missed so much that I had to start over in many subjects. I was afraid to raise my hand, afraid to be seen. I had spent so long trying to be invisible that stepping into the light felt like standing on a stage with no script. But I had one teacher, Mrs. Bennett, who noticed me, who left notes on my desk that said things like, "You're doing great," or "You are not what they did to you." I kept every one of those notes in a shoebox under my bed. I went to therapy. It was slow, painful. There were days I walked out mid-session, days I screamed at my therapist for not understanding, days I said nothing at all. But little by little, I peeled back the layers of shame that had wrapped around my soul. I stopped blaming myself. I stopped apologizing for surviving. I learned to call what happened by its real name: abuse, rape, exploitation. I learned that forgiveness wasn't a requirement. That healing didn't have to include letting anyone back into my life who had hurt me. At 16, I legally changed my name. Sarah Myers was buried in the past. I became someone else. Someone who had power over her own story. Someone who could walk into a room without shrinking. It wasn't magic, it wasn't instant, but it was real. I worked part-time at a bakery and started sewing again. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I made dresses for little girls and prayed they would never have to live what I had lived. I stitched hope into every seam. At 20, I testified in a civil case against the church. I stood in a courtroom, my voice shaking, and told the truth to a room full of people who had once looked through me. I named names, I pointed to faces. I didn't whisper, I didn't flinch. The case was dismissed for lack of evidence, but I left that courtroom lighter, not because justice had been served, but because I had spoken. I had taken back the voice they tried to steal from me. Now in my 60s, I live alone in a small house filled with light. I open the curtains in the morning and let the sun touch every corner. I play music while I cook. I drink coffee from a chipped mug I've had for 20 years. I have no children of my own, but I mentor girls in the foster system. I tell them they are not broken, that survival is not shameful, that scars are proof we fought to stay alive. Some nights I still wake up sweating, my sheets twisted, my throat dry. The past doesn't vanish. It softens. It becomes something I carry, not something that carries me. I light candles for the ones who didn't make it out. I speak their names in my heart. I honor them by living freely, loudly, truthfully. There is something sacred about survival, about choosing to wake up even when the world has given you every reason not to, about looking in the mirror and seeing not what they did to you, but who you are despite it. I am not the little girl behind the church. I am not the bruises. I am not the silence. I am the woman who lived, the woman who rose, the woman who speaks. If you have made it this far, thank you. Thank you for listening, for witnessing, for refusing to look away. Stories like mine are not easy to hear, but they are necessary, because silence protects the abuser and truth protects the survivor. Please, if this story moved you, do not let it end here. Share it. Speak about it. Let others know that no one is ever truly alone. There is light on the other side of pain. There is life after trauma. And there is hope for those still trapped in the dark. The next story is already waiting for you. It's on your screen. Click it. Watch it. Carry these voices with you. Let them change the way you see the world. Because someone out there is still behind that locked door. And they need to know someone is listening.